Welcome to Focus on Albany. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is David Lombardo of the Capitol Press Room, and we're going to talk about the different things that have happened since we last spoke. So, David, the last time we spoke, it was the end of the Republican state convention. What's happened since then?
Yes.
The petition process has stopped, has ended. The candidates are go they're ready to run for their primaries. And most important thing, we don't have a lieutenant governor anymore. So let's talk about the petition process. So the candidates for on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, did they all qualify for the ballot?
So on the Democratic side, as the followers of your show probably know, Governor Kathy Hochul qualified back at the convention by getting the distinction of being the party's sort of designated candidate. And then Congressman Tom Suozzi and New York City Public Advocate Jumaane Williams had to actually go out and collect the required signatures, which they appear to have done, submitting the number that they needed at the early part of April to the State Board of Elections. There were no challenges to their petitions. So the State Board of Elections basically just rubber stamps them. They don't go through it and make sure that they're all good unless there are challenges to them. So there will be a three-way Democratic primary for the gubernatorial nomination with the Democrats. On the other side of the equation, with the Republicans, the party's designee there is Long Island Congressman Lee Zeldin, who achieved that distinction at their party convention, which means he didn't need to circulate petitions. That left businessman Harry Wilson, former Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino, and former Trump administration official Andrew Giuliani to have to collect signatures to get on the ballot. They all submitted what would on their face be enough signatures. There were some initial objections to their petitions. We will have to see whether there are specific objections that are filed subsequently. I'm not sure what the timeline for that is. If there aren't specific ones filed, then they're all going to get on the ballot. If there are specific challenges filed, they could end up having to go to court to defend their selection process. Right now, it does appear, though, that we will have a four-way primary on the Republican side for their gubernatorial nomination, though.
And recently, shockwaves throughout the state. Um, Brian Benjamin was arrested. He is no longer the lieutenant governor. So, what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, there's a couple different storylines to follow there. First, you have Brian Benjamin's personal challenges, his legal challenges. He is resigned from office. He suspended his campaign for a full 4 years as lieutenant governor to what he says is focus on clearing his name. He argues that the grant he secured, this education nonprofit, was above board. He argues that his fundraising was never part of any sort of quid pro quo scheme. So there's that element. And there has been a mixed record of federal corruption prosecutions in New York. We saw Sheldon Silver, the Assembly Speaker, and Dean Skelos, the former Senate Majority Leader, both get convicted, but there were challenges in those trials, and there have been an evolving interpretation of honest theft of services and how you need to prove that. And federal prosecutors have acted like the scheme that they've outlined with Brian Benjamin is pretty clear cut and a slam dunk in terms of a case. But I think that things in Albany are never that clear. And I think that'll be something that we will have to watch and see how that plays out. The other element of this is the vacant seat itself. We now have no lieutenant governor. We have Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins serving as the acting lieutenant governor, basically filling in the chain of succession. Doesn't mean she needs to give up her spot as Senate Majority Leader or anything like that. Just if something happened to Kathy Hochul, she would become the governor. And it remains to be seen who or when Governor Kathy Hochul will fill this lieutenant governor spot, because, and we can get to this, but because the way our political system works, anyone that she taps is likely just a seat filler. They will not be her running mate in November if she is the Democratic nominee. So we need to figure out what sort of criteria she will value in having a number two. We saw something kind of similar to this in 2009 when David Paterson, the governor who became governor after Eliot Spitzer resigned, appointed Dick Ravitch as a sort of placeholder in the lieutenant governor spot. Dick's still alive. Maybe Kathy could appoint him. And so then
Quite old, though, right?
he is quite old. Yes, he's quite old. But he's still ticking, and no one would mistake him as someone to be a political threat. And then you have another narrative, which is a questioning Kathy Hochul's judgment in appointing Brian Benjamin in the first place. And then you also have the political narrative, which is what does this mean for the Democratic ticket and who might be the lieutenant governor candidate come November?
I when I first heard it, I thought, "Oh, this is 2009 all over again." Um, what about the state chairman trying to get a third party on the ballot? What do you think about that?
I think it's something we've seen play out multiple times over the last 10 years plus. The Democratic Party created the Women's Equality Party at the behest of Andrew Cuomo to help his electoral chances. I believe that was in 2014. That same year, the Republicans created the Stop Common Core line, which then evolved into the Reform Party line. So we see these third party lines come up frequently from the major parties as a means of increasing their name on the ballot. So instead of just appearing, say, on the Democratic Party line, you can also appear, in the case of the Democrats, on the Fair Deal line. In the case of the Republicans, if they were to create another line, it could be the Square Deal, whatever. So this has gotten a lot of flack from people on the far left of the Democratic Party as some way to undermine the Democratic Party. I'm not so sure it's that nefarious or nefarious, however you want to pronounce it. And I think it remains to be seen if ultimately Democratic incumbents who lose primaries use this third party line as a way to try to hold on to their seats, then yeah, it is kind of a way to uh, keep out the far left and prop up the moderate incumbents. But I don't necessarily see it playing out that way. I think it's for candidates who are concerned that they won't be able to get the Working Families Party background endorsement, excuse me, and so I think it remains to be seen also how many people choose to actually run on this line. It seems like Kathy Hochul views this as an important way to boost her electoral chances. But I'm curious how many down ballot candidates will actually run on this. Will members of Congress run on this? Will assembly members, Senate, because they're going to have to collect signatures, and that's a lot of work for the staff and volunteers that would rather be focusing on other stuff.
Do you think do you think the chairman is creating a path for Andrew Cuomo to get
No,
back? You don't.
no,
Okay.
nope.
I heard. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
the I think that the only way onto the ballot for Cuomo is an independent petitioning. But Jay Jacobs is not clearing a path for Andrew Cuomo, largely because I think he knows that Andrew Cuomo is not electable in November, but also if he was to get on in this independent line, you would then also have a Democratic nominee and you would have a Republican nominee, and this would end up having a Republican get elected, and Jay Jacobs has no desire to see that happen. So this is also not shouldn't be viewed as a back doorway to get Andrew Cuomo back into state government.
Okay, now the whole thing with Benjamin, do you think this holds into question Kathy Hochul's judgment?
I think it could. I think that a reasonable narrative has emerged that questions why she chose him and what that says about her and her approach to leadership and delegating authority, because there was smoke around Brian Benjamin when he was chosen. There's been reporting as early as January of last year that highlighted issues with his campaign fundraising. And while none of it implicated him directly, it speaks to him at the very least having questionable campaign apparatus. And so if that's going on, why do you choose him when there are people who have pretty clean, clear records? I think she was focused primarily on trying to appeal to certain constituencies, trying to appeal to Black voters in the city. I think the pick is of him as lieutenant governor was probably pretty politically motivated, and I don't think she necessarily cared what was going on, and was willing to look the other way because she felt like she had someone good on paper. Um, at least that's what's emerged from a lot of the reporting, and that's what seems to make sense if you view this situation through a political lens. So yeah, I think it does reflect poorly on her. Also, the fact that, as of a week ago, she was standing right by him saying, yeah, this is my guy. I have the utmost confidence in him, which is also shows kind of a lack of awareness of where things could have been heading with him, and just makes her look bad politically.
So, I know I assume that Jemani Williams would have said no, but don't you think Jemani Williams would have been a better choice than Brian Benjamin?
Well, Jumaane Williams has some of his own skeletons that we see raised on Twitter about from his closet. People talk about some of his connections with shady characters. So maybe one of the reasons why Jumaane Williams has never come under this sort of scrutiny and the skeletons haven't really emerged is because people don't take him as seriously on a state level, and so he doesn't draw on the attraction of other people. So I wouldn't necessarily say that he would stay, you know, squeaky clean throughout all of this. But I know you do like the idea of having Jumaane Williams be the running mate for Kathy Hochul, and I think what I've pushed back in the past is saying that. Yeah, from a political sense, if you're trying to get ducks in a row, line up some far left support and you're Kathy Hochul with more of a moderate background, then sure, that makes sense. But I also think she wanted someone who kind of had some of those far left bona fides, but would also not rock the boat, so to speak. Whereas Jumaane Williams is not going to be the team player that she would have wanted had he become a member of her administration. And then you also have to think about the idea that, okay, yes, this is supposedly your number two, and you need them to be ready to run, and you want them to potentially have your views on a lot of issues. So taking that less cynical point of view, then that would make Jumaane Williams not the appropriate pick for Kathy Hochul, since they have such disparate views.
Now, there's also been an issue with the stadium in Buffalo. Tell us a little bit about that.
So we knew for months now that the governor was going to try to include some sort of funding in the final state budget for a new Buffalo Bills stadium. She opted not to include even a basic proposal in the January budget, arguing that the deal wasn't together. We didn't know what was required, so it wouldn't be appropriate to put something in. Then, with just a few days to go in the budget negotiations, she came out with this package of $600 million needed as state funds, Erie County needing to put in money. And then shortly after that, she revealed that the Seneca Nation would be putting forward a settlement with the state for some of the back casino money it owes. and that money would go toward the state's share of the capital investment in the new stadium. And so there were all these sort of moving parts, and she was basically making the case that this was a great deal, that the Bills had asked for 100% of the stadium to be financed. So for them to only have to do a majority of it, the taxpayers, that is, represented a good bargain for New York. It all is pretty classic economic development in New York. There's been a lot of hand wringing and people, grabbing their nose saying this is no good. But we've seen these kind of large investments in the past, and it's clear that they are not going anywhere because state lawmakers went along with it in the state budget. They could have voted this down. They could have said, no, we're not going to use money this way. But Western New York lawmakers, including Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, really like this. They believe this is an important investment in their region. And I think it really was just getting pushback from downstate Democrats who argued that this was not a good use of funds, that they think this could have been invested in more human service oriented programs. But ultimately, Kathy Hochul, who was from Western New York, got her way.
So, where were you in 2009?
In the summer,
What with the coup?
I was in Albany working for the Legislative Gazette. It was my first year right out of college. So I was on the concourse running over to the Capitol every day.
So, is this reminiscent of 2009, do you think, with the problems with Brian Benjamin?
Well, luckily, there have been so many examples of corruption in New York that there are lots of opportunities to find parallels. 2009, to me, will always stand out as an era of government failure, the inability of the government to get anything done. Whereas right now, we got a budget done. We look like we have a legislature and governor who can pass legislation and agree on things for the remainder of the session. So I don't necessarily see the 2009 parallels. I see things more akin to other corruption scandals, corruption resignations. Alan Hevesy, the state controller, who improperly used his office. So Brian Benjamin, allegedly improperly used his Senate office. He didn't personally enrich himself, so that doesn't really make comparisons to Shelley Silver or Dean Skelos. But there are other people like Malcolm Smith who tried to use his political sway to help his political chances in a bid to be New York City mayor, which was a couple of years after the coup. So there's definitely some comparisons to that. Politicians in New York using their government office to increase their political chances is nothing new here. I think what's surprising is that we haven't had anything like this now for a couple years. It seems like mostly what's been dogging politicians is their personal conduct, and whether that's harassment of a sexual nature or just creating hostile work environments. So this is a real classic case of corruption, allegedly.
So, let's talk about the Republicans for a couple of minutes. Um, do you think the Democrats have a firm grip on the state Senate?
State Senate, yeah, definitely. I think the one variable is the lines that finally emerge as a result of redistricting and the court battle over the redistricting. I think that this is not necessarily going to be a good year nationally for Democrats, and I think that that's going to trickle down to New York. But even with the worst case scenario version of maps that could be adopted for 2022, I think that Democrats have a supermajority in the Senate, and they, at the very worst, would shed some seats. But if they're able to even get their redistricting maps that they created in, they could theoretically grow their majority because of how good those maps are for them in terms of the math and how it works out in terms of the new districts. But worst case scenario, they lose a couple seats. best case scenario, they gain a couple seats. Either way, it's just a question of whether they have a supermajority or no supermajority.
Um, and I'm sorry. What about? I just lost my train of thought.
Well, you want me to talk about the assembly?
Well, I know the assembly will be Democratic for the rest of eternity, I believe.
Yeah, but it's funny that we take that for granted, but yet we still think about the Senate as this institution that's up for grabs. But when we think about the actual count and how it breaks down, the Senate majority as a proportion is representative of the Assembly majority. And now that they have control of redistricting, I think the idea that the chamber is up for grabs now or in the future is a mistake, and that this is going to be a dynamic more akin to the assembly.
What about the governorship? Do you think that the Republicans smell blood in the water? Do you think they have a shot at big uh, winning the governorship?
Uh, so when you ask if they have a shot, that makes me think of the movie Dumb and Dumber, and the love interest for Jim Carrey, who's definitely not a love interest, but only in his mind, tells him he has about a 1 in a million shot. And I kind of think that's how I think about the Republican chances in November for winning the executive mansion. They have a shot. It's not a good one. And with every little scandal, though, that shot becomes more plausible. Whether it's the Buffalo Billion deal, whether it's Brian Benjamin, whether it's the national environment. So none of that is going to help Democrats. Everything that Joe Biden does, the president does, seems to hurt Democrats' chances for the fall. So you need all of this collection of activity to coalesce sort of perfectly. You need Republicans to run the perfect campaign. They need to run the perfect candidate. Democrats need to find other ways to continue to sabotage themselves. But at the end of the day, the Democratic enrollment advantage is so large in New York, so much bigger than it was in 1994 when people try to make that comparison, that it is still the Democrats' race to lose in terms of holding on to the executive mansion.
Okay, so you think the next couple of months are going to be interesting? Do you see any twists and turns in the road?
Well, I imagine there will be some twists and turns in the road. I wish I could tell you what they're going to be. But at this point, I think that the Democratic primary is really going to loom over the final, month and a half of the legislative session. And I think that's the framing device with which we should view all of this. Tom Suozzi, the Long Island congressman, has been advertising a lot on television, and I think that's definitely in Kathy Hochul's consciousness. Jumaane Williams has not really been very present on the campaign trail. He hasn't been up on TV, so I don't think she's necessarily as concerned about him coming at her left. So I think that won't necessarily inform a lot of her decisions. But I think the Swazi challenge really complicates things for her and is going to inform her actions. And then you have the sort of leftover unhappy feelings from the Assembly Democrats from this budget process. Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie did not emerge from this with any extra love for Governor Hochul. So it remains to be seen how they get along heading now through June 2nd when the session's scheduled to end. So it'll be interesting to see whether the Assembly and the Senate to try to push their legislative agenda or just try to get out of town before the primaries.
Swazi's coming to Hochul from the right,
Yeah.
and Jumaane Williams from the left. Who's the stronger of the two candidates, would you believe?
So I think that Jumaane Williams has a baked in amount of support. Like in 2018, we saw that Andrew Cuomo got 65% of the vote and Cynthia Nixon got 35% of the vote in their Democratic primary. So I kind of think that Jumaane Williams has that sort of 35% number almost sort of baked in to his campaign, There's just these far left Democrats who are always going to be kind of unsatisfied with whoever the mainstream is. So in that regard, I think he is better positioned than Tom Suozzi. Like he could come in second in a primary, which Kathy Hochul will win, but I still view Tom Suozzi as the more interesting one because he's peeling into Kathy Hochul's actual voters. He is going to potentially eat away at that 65% threshold that Andrew Cuomo was able to get. And if she emerges with 50% of the primary, she still wins. She gets 40 something percent, she still wins.
Mhm.
But it really reflects a problem she has heading into November in terms of hanging on to more moderate or even conservative Democratic voters. So I really think the Swazi campaign is more interesting, and it's also been the one that's much more active, even though there have been some unforced errors by the Long Island congressman.
So we have a couple of minutes left. So, like I say on every show, give yourself a little plug. What will you be talking about on your show?
Well, people who want to get more of this content can follow us at Cap Press Room on Twitter. They should check out our website, which is capitalpressroom.org. Our show is syndicated all over the state, and you can find the schedule with when we're airing in your neck of the woods at capitalpressroom.org. Or if you want to get the show on demand, you can get us as a podcast wherever you your favorite shows, whether it's Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, the Google Music. And this week, looks like we're going to be talking a little bit about the conditional licenses for hemp farmers to grow marijuana. We're going to do something about Child Abuse Prevention Month, which is April, and we're going to try to get the Environmental Conservation Commissioner Basil Sagos on the show to learn more about what the budget did or didn't do in terms of protecting and regulating the environment.
So you're still enjoying filling Susan's shoes, right?
I do. That the heels were a little tough to get used to, but I am definitely enjoying them.
And you enjoy working right in the Capitol, I assume.
I do. It feels nice to be right in the heart of Albany politics, to be able to walk out of this cubicle and be right where the bills are being passed and the corruption schemes are being cooked up.
So, David, we're just about out of time. So, everybody listening, listen to David on the radio. He's terrific. So, we'll talk again as this session unfolds, this primary season unfolds, and I'm sure we will have a lot to talk about over the coming months. So thank you for being on Focus on Albany.
Thank you,
Look
Cynthia.
forward to talking with you again, and thank you everybody for listening. And if you like this show, subscribe to my YouTube page. David, have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.